First of all, we have Maria Carolina G. Rodrigues. Hopefully I've pronounced that right, Maria.
Yes, yes.
From the foremost of Nubia to the great god of the first time, Egyptian adaptations and interaction with Nubians during the first half of the 18th dynasty. Maria has a BA in history from the Pontifical University Catholic of Sao Paulo and an MPhil in social history from the University of Sao Paulo. Her master's dissertation examines the relationship between Egypt and Nubia during the first half of the 18th dynasty, during the expansion towards the south. She's interested in power relations and mutual cultural influences between the Egyptians and Nubians. She's a member of the Ancient Near East Laboratory of the University of Sao Paulo and is part of the organizing committee of the Seminaros de Egyptologica. Again, I'm really sorry about my pronunciation, it's terrible.
No, it's okay.
Egyptological seminar series. And she's also part of the Being Egyptian project. The floor is yours, Maria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Maria. Thank you so much for the introduction. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to present my research today. I also thank FAPESP for funding my project, my research, and my supervisor for his encouragement, and my colleagues from LAOP for their helpful insights and comments on my research as well. Well, today I brought this presentation is part of my master's dissertation, in which I analyzed the relationship between Egypt and Nubia based on material culture. And during my research, I hoped to see and to show that long-term interactions between Egypt and Nubia show us mutual influences through the adaptation of various elements, known and recognized by both. I hope to show some of them, to highlight some of these elements. These elements we are going to see through royal representations, which were a way to reaffirm power in Egypt and in Nubia in different ways, in different strategies. I argue these mutual influences are forms of identity negotiations in order for Egyptians or Nubians to be accepted into different spheres of authority and social interactions. I explore Egyptian adaptation through the incorporation and alteration of deity representations. So we can see that there are mutual influences, not just the Nubians adapting and using elements from the Egyptian traditions and cultures as well. So in order for us to see that, we need to take some elements into account, especially the context. As said before, I work mainly with the first half of the 18th dynasty from the New Kingdom, where the Egyptians expanded their domains towards the south, and the territory between the fourth and the fifth cataract was put under influence and control of Egypt. The Egyptian control in Lower Nubia and Upper Nubia was not the same. So I follow Robert Merkel's argument that Lower Nubia would be under direct control and be reorganized, mirroring the Egyptian organization. In Lower Nubia, some native elite members were integrated in the administrative apparatus. We can say, for instance, the Teket family. They were integrated, so they had specific roles into this apparatus, Egyptian apparatus in Lower Nubia. But in contrast, in Upper Nubia, the native elites would have more flexibility. They would have more authority over their territory. So the Egyptian control would be less direct than Lower Nubia. And this is significant for us during this presentation as well. I would like to highlight two regions between this interaction, right? The Semina region at the second cataract and the border between Egypt and Upper Nubia and Nubia between the fourth and the fifth cataract as well in Kyrgyz and Jebel Barkal. Semina is important for us because their historic importance in from the Middle Kingdom with the build of the fortresses and the temple later on from Thutmose III. And the fourth cataract, as I said, is important to us because of the border region in Kyrgyz and the importance of Jebel Barkal and the temple built also under Tutmo's third reign. I here brought for us to analyze, to see some set of evidence from Tutmo's first, third, and Hatshepsut's reign. And let's go. The first set of evidence that are brought is the rock stele of Tutmo's first in Kyrgyz. And we're going to see together with the Jebel Barkal stela from under Tutmo's third reign in Jebel Barkal, both in Upper Nubia. So first to begin, this is the rock stele of Tutmo's first in Kyrgyz, and some elements we need to highlight a bit. The first few elements that must be highlighted is the orientation of Horus and Amun. They are both facing each other, and Amun is oriented to the rising sun, indicating protection from Amun to Horus, which represents the king of Egypt. I would also like to emphasize that although he represents the king of Egypt, this representation is of Horus, is a deity, is a god, is not the visual image of the pharaoh, of a human being. Therefore, the positions of both of them suggest the transmission of life and power to Horus from Amun. The second element is the war scepter with an ankh at the top. This scepter, these elements, when pieced together, may represent the action of pouring life from Amun to Horus. And so far, we can see the Egyptian effort to reaffirm power and authority through royal elements in Kyrgyz. And this rock stela was on the road, so people would be able to see this representation if they passed by. And these elements are very iconic, they're very Egyptian. So they would be seeing something extremely Egyptianized. Let's put it this way for now. And also we have to highlight as well the political context of this stela with, as I said, the border situation in Kyrgyz being marked by Tutmosis I. The last piece, the last element that I want to emphasize here is the ram-headed god Amun, the characteristic of the ram head. This is important for us because, as far as we know, this is the first time that Amun is represented, is depicted as ram-headed, and is at Kyrgyz, Upper Nubia. And this can have importance and a symbolic value, especially in this place, because of the pastoral codes that were very significant in this region. The cattle and the pastoral codes, really, they were very significant here because of their role, their importance with interactions, economic interactions, associated, for instance, with the tax payment, and also, as I said, with the pastoral codes from this region as well. And in here, we can see this effort to connect, of the Egyptians to connect elements with Nubian cultures and habits of the region, which is interesting because this importance of the cattle, this importance of the pastoral codes, we can see the connection with an Egyptian cultural habit, with an Egyptian importance as well. For instance, we have the bull, the importance of the bull associated with the pharaoh itself. And in the same, in Kyrgyz, we can still see from Tutmosis III as well, and even Tutmosis I, we can see the bull depicted close by. So we have this connection of the same element in different spheres, in different cultural realities and social interactions. Based on that, and keeping this in mind, we go now to Jebel Barkal. Now Tutmosis III, different reigns, but we have a link there. This link we can see through this rock stela. It's also Jebel Barkal in the fourth, between the fourth and the fifth cataract, so it's still Upper Nubia. And here we can still see Amun being represented as ram-headed. And here is very interesting because Jebel Barkal is called the thrones of the two lands, associating the Upper Nubia with Egypt, basically with the two lands, with Lower and Upper Egypt. Here we see this main Egyptian reference to power that was relocated to Jebel Barkal with Amun before the myth origin of the two lands being reunited. So when we see Amun ram-headed being associated with this origin before the two lands being united, we have relocation of power, bringing the importance of Amun as ram-headed being connected with Amun of Karnak. And so here we also see an effort to highlight similarities and try to close the distance between Egyptians and Nubians. This can be seen as a form of alliance, perhaps, we'll see, or even an effort to reaffirm power. It's a possibility as well, but it's very interesting to see this happening in Upper Nubia. Well, we saw Amun being adapted and emphasize an element of similarity between Egyptians and Nubians here, but it's not the only element being used in this kind of logic, of this strategy. We can also see now in Lower Nubia some elements, different elements being highlighted and used. The first one is in Semina, so near the second cataract, closer to Lower Nubia right now. And this element that I emphasize here is another deity. Now Didwen, for instance, it's a good example of this adaptation and adoption of elements. So we are now under Tutmosis III's reign, and Semina, just like I said, and we see the recontextualization of this Nubian deity. This temple, the temple of Semina from Tutmosis III, this image that we are going to see, this relief, is on the external wall, the external west wall, so also would be able to be seen by passers-by. Yes, and these also want to highlight some elements. The first one is the Dwen. As we can see, the Dwen here is depicted bigger than other elements of the screen. He's shown with Egyptian characteristics, so it's difficult to understand him as a Nubian only by seeing this image. And the Dwen here is affixing a crown, and I know this is the state of conservation is poor, so it's difficult to identify some elements, but he's affixing a crown, and this would be the crown of Upper Egypt on top of Tutmosis III's head. Apologies. And we can see, so Tutmosis III kneeling in front of the Dwen, affixing a crown. This temple was dedicated to Tedwen and Sesostris III. These two figures are extremely relevant for this region, since they were known from a long time, since the Middle Kingdom, at least, in this region, and Sesostris III was already worshipped at this region. He's very popular in this region between Nubians. He's considered at a point a Nubian deity. Tedwen is recognized since the pyramid text by the Egyptians as a Nubian deity, as a foreigner. So here we have this scene of a Nubian deity crowning an Egyptian pharaoh. And here, note that the pharaoh is not depicted as an Egyptian deity. He has the physical traits of the king, of a ruler. So he's a human Egyptian ruler. It's different from what we see in Upper Nubia, from when we saw Amun and Horus. And this gets clearer if we connect this scene with the inscription that follows it. In the passage, in these inscriptions, we can see Tedwen associated with Nubia, as the Dwayne's called the foremost of Nubia, the great god, right? And he is connected to the heritage of the king of Egypt. So in this case, the Dwayne would be given power, he would be reaffirm Egyptian power in Lower Nubia. We have, again, a connection with this political idea of control from Egypt in this region. It's, again, very interesting to see a Nubian deity being represented with this prominent figure in this aspect in this temple in Nubia. But we can also see the Dwayne in another context, in a different one. Now, inside of Egypt, near Thebes, in Hatshepsut del Rahari temple. In this case, the Dwayne is also represented in as a prominent figure. He's also seen as the biggest figure in the image, as I said, holding a scepter, which empowers him as well with this role of a ruler, of authority, of control, of power. But here we have some differences, although it's similar to the other one with this characterization as an Egyptian, but the context, as I said, is different, since now the Nubians are represented as captives. They are tied by ropes, and we know therefore near for a number of elements. For instance, their depiction is more what we would hope to see in Egypt, since the Nubians have curly hair, they are in a position of submission to Egyptians, and is the Dwayne who is bringing these captives, these Nubian figures, to Egypt to be offered. So here we have a symbol of authority delivering this man, but in Hatshepsut context, under a period that we would assume that we could see more plurality, political plurality, not a unified situation of power inside of Egypt. So we have different elements of Nubian origin being adopted and being transformed or used to focus on similarities or differences according to their context, according to where they are. And that brings us to some hypotheses. My main hypothesis here is that we can see mutual influences between Nubian and Egyptians. We cannot only affirm that Nubians were Egyptianized or that they show more Egyptianity. We see elements, specific chosen elements that connect Nubians and Egyptians through Egyptian sources as well. And they were specific elements for a number of reasons. My hypothesis here, as I mentioned, is that to highlight, for instance, the plurality of Nubian societies, of Nubian cultures, and that they understood these differences. That is why, for example, they chose different elements to be shown, to be incorporated and to be adapted in different regions. In a place as Upper Nubia, where the control would be less direct, as in Lower Nubia, we have elements associated with deities and associated with deities that could have a connection and link to their cultural and heritage, their identities from these Nubian native societies. In contrast to Lower Nubia, where, for instance, we have the depiction of the pharaoh itself, Thutmose III is depicted as Thutmose III, as a pharaoh, as a human. So we can probably argue that this would indicate as well these different spheres of control, but actually the recognition of this cultural plurality between them. And with the Dwayne, of course, with Amun as well, we can see adaptations of the strategies of interactions, not only of power, but maybe social as well, since the Dwayne can be seen as a way to highlight this heterogeneity in Egypt as well, this lack of a political unity or combat or something of disputes, of power disputes inside of Egypt and outside as well. So in conclusion, I argue that these elements show us these mutual influences, but also they can show us more about disputes, power disputes, and this recognition of plurality, that they knew that this that the relationship between Egyptians and Nubians were more complex than simply an Egyptianization of the Nubians or their submission, for instance. So this is some of my bibliography, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm open to questions, comments, and helpful insights on my research since I'm beginning this trajectory. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria. It was really, really interesting. Thank you. May I start with the questions, or do we want to start? Okay, great. For the moment, we don't have any questions in the chat, but again, if you want to ask questions, just write them in the chat and I will read them to our speaker. But I have a question. So I would like to ask you, if you have to choose just one, in your opinion, what is the most, let's say, evident characteristic belonging to Nubians and adapted by Egyptians?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Thank you very much. It's a bit hard to choose only one.
Yeah, I believe it's hard.
It's very hard. I personally like very much this association with Amun and the cattle, not just Amun, but this closeness we can see constructed with the pastoral cults, not only for Amun, but also from Tombos, for instance, that they have this, even the Egyptians, they mention the importance of the cattle, the Nubians try to hide, for instance, the cattle. So I think it's very interesting because even though we don't have, as Timothy Kendall said, we don't have conclusive evidence that the ram-headed Amun is in fact of Nubian origin, we can associate that as a connection because the pastoral codes are important, even Nubian and Egypt. So we have a connection there. It's an effort of similarity. So my hypothesis, my point of view, this is evidence to try to close the bridge between them to make Egyptian cultures and Nubian cultures closer. So I think this is one of the evidence that I'm most interested in to keep working on.
Thank you very much. Really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Do we have any other questions in the chat with you, Valentina? Or should
yes, just a pop-up one question. Have you any thoughts on the quote-unquote Egyptianized artistic portrayal of a primary Nubian god?
Egyptianized. So I'm going to talk about the Duene because it's the one that I studied the most, that I know more. I think it's very interesting to see that I have a problem with Egyptianized. we use it a lot. I think that it's quite interesting to see these Egyptian elements to highlight differences and similarities between them. I think it's very interesting to see that they chose a specific Nubian element. They knew this god from the pyramid texts, so from the Old Kingdom. And it's not just any deity, Nubian deity, is a deity related to incense or to natural resources in Nubia. So it's specific elements. So this Egyptianized maybe element is to try to highlight a connection with the importance of incense. So don't know if we can call Egyptianized, but maybe to show the link. It's difficult to see this Egyptianized because I think it's how they knew the god. It's not just to make it closer to Egypt, but it's how they understood the figure as well. It's not the idea just, we don't recognize this deity as being foreigner, because almost every time we have evidence on the dwelling, for instance, he is depicted and emphasized as a foreigner god. So I think it's how they understood this deity more than trying to Egyptianize it. I don't know if I answered the question.
Thank you. I believe so. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Is that all the questions in the chat?
Yes, that's the last.
Thank you so much, Maria. Anyone in the room have any questions? If not, I do have another one. Sorry, I'm asking lots of questions today. You mentioned that a lot of these stelae and wall reliefs, they're highlighting the connections between Egypt and Nubia. Who was the intended audience? Who were they trying to make these points to? Is it possible to tell?
So this is one of the main questions of my dissertation. It's difficult to ascribe the intended audience. I can only assume, I can give hypothesis. So take, for instance, the Kyrgyz, the rock stela from Kyrgyz, and for instance, the Dwen depiction of fixing the crown in Semna. They were both in a place of circulation. So people could see, could pass by. So if we take into account the Kyrgyz stela, and we have inscriptions that follows it, that tries to mark the border, saying that any Nubian who passes this region has to follow some rules, and etc. I think that the image was meant to be seen by passers-by. I don't know if they were Nubians or Egyptians or from other places, but I think this specific one was meant to be seen. I can only assume by people that understood or had some connections with some of the elements, because this was a very Egyptian way of drawing elements, of being represented. So I suppose that people would recognize that not being as their own if they were native Nubians. So I think they were meant to have an impact on the passers-by. But when we take into account that when in Del Bahari, I don't think he was meant to be seen by everybody, since the circulation was more restricted. I think we have a difference of audiences. That's one of the reasons why I think they were part of different strategies of different contexts or organizations, even though their depiction can be similar. I think they have different targets, but it's difficult to ascribe which specific target they were meant.
That's fab. Thank you. Sorry for such a tricky question.
No,
I'm
that's okay.
today. I'm very sorry.
No, it's amazing. Thank you.
Old Joe is telling me we are now at 12 o'clock. So can we all give a big thank you to Maria, please, for her fantastic presentation?
Thank you so much.